Hello, I'm Louisa Baldini, and I'm delighted to be moderating this In Focus panel on the thing that's on everybody's minds, COVID-19, delivering the vaccine. Within the past couple of hours, Pfizer-BioNTech have released new data showing their vaccine appears to protect 95% of adults of all ages, races, and ethnicity. That's up from 90% efficacy. US company Moderna also unveiled their vaccine recently, claiming 95% protection. Russia has declared they have a breakthrough, and a vaccine is still being worked on by Oxford University and AstraZeneca. It was paused due to a suspected adverse reaction, which the team described as a routine pause, but they're expecting to announce results within weeks. But are these new vaccines safe and efficacious? And what comes next? How will these vaccines be made, allocated, and used in vaccination programs? And how well will they work in real populations? And can we ever expect to see herd immunity from vaccination? Well, I'll be putting those and many other questions to our panel, and I'm sure that many of you watching will also want to submit your queries, so please do that, and I will ask our panel of speakers to answer your questions. Before I introduce those speakers, I just wanted to make a point on gender balance. Whilst the WISH 2020 summit has an overall balance in gender representation due to a few cancellations, and despite best efforts today, our panel is composed of only men, but they are very knowledgeable. So let's introduce them now. We've got Jim Campbell, Director of the Health Workforce for the World Health Organization, joining us from Geneva. We have Dr. Victor Zhao, President of the National Academy of Medicine in the USA, who is joining us from Washington, D.C. Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute in South Korea. He joins us from Seoul. And joining us from Hyderabad in India is Dr. Krishna Ella, Chairman and Managing Director of Bharat Biotech. And just some breaking news, which I can also share with you on top of that new data from Pfizer. They have apparently just announced completion of their phase 3 trial, meeting all primary efficacy endpoints. So things really are moving quickly. And to that point, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Zhao, vaccines are being produced at breakneck speed. They normally take years, if not decades. As president of the National Academy of Medicine, are you at all concerned?
Thank you, Louise, for asking me and inviting me to this very important meeting. And I look forward to joining my colleagues. So it's a very exciting day that, in fact, this announcement from Pfizer. But we should point out that this is news release. I don't think any of us have seen the data yet. But that being said, they're certainly claiming that they've ended the completed, if you will, the phase 3 trial, and the results are very encouraging. 95% effectiveness in the population they studied. So, you know, this breakneck speed, of course, is so exciting, encouraging, but it could also be somewhat nerve-wracking for some. The question that being asked would clearly be, does it work in every population? Does it work in the older, people of color, etc.? Second is, how safe is it, importantly? And of course, when we have initial doses, who get it first? And so I think the end of the day, the data has to be credible, has to be carefully reviewed, and it'll go through the regulatory agencies. I think a very important issue is safety, because all these studies have short follow-up. For example, the Pfizer study is a 2-week follow-up. Although they've seen no serious effect, we do know that from some of the other studies in the past, such as swine flu influenza vaccine, that you get rare cases of in this case, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which occurs 1 case per 100,000. So you can imagine there's still a big safety issue that needs to be assessed. And that can only be done by long-term surveillance and follow-up. So I would say quickly, this is still early data. I won't say early data, but certainly data that's not been fully vetted. It'll go through what we know as emergency use authorization, not the usual, in this case, our country, FDA approval. It'll probably be able to be used by December, but we still have a lot of things that we don't know, particularly in safety.
Normally, we would know within a couple of months if any patients in the trial had suffered adverse effects, though. So clearly, they are thinking that it is safe enough. I mean, how long would we need to wait to follow up the trial to be 100% sure, if you can ever be?
Well, ordinarily, one would like to have a year's follow-up or at least months follow-up. Even whatever the length of time, you do need phase 4 surveillance. That is, that when you give it to millions and millions of people, you may pick up some side effect you couldn't pick up in 40,000 people, for example, right, in your trial.
Yeah, I heard a comment. I can't remember who it was attributed to, but someone involved in the development of vaccines who said you only breathe a sigh of relief once it's been administered to 3 million people. And at the moment, of course, in these trials, we're talking about, for example, with the Pfizer one, 43,000. Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute in South Korea, we hear about these efficacy figures, now 95% for Pfizer, also for Moderna, but efficacy is not the same as effectiveness, is it? What is the difference? Can you remind us?
Yes, so these phase 3 trials are designed very, very specifically and without bias to look at individual protective effects. You randomize some people to vaccine and some people to placebo in a way to really, really make absolutely sure that that vaccine is protecting someone against disease and is safe. But the broader question is, how will the vaccine work in communities? So for instance, the measles vaccine, 95% effect, has an efficacy of 95%, but you have to have vaccination rates above 90% to really achieve some level of herd protection. Our oral cholera vaccine at IVI, the efficacy is 55%, but when you vaccinate enough people in an Indian city, you get effectiveness of 85%. So effectiveness really is the big picture. It's, does this actually work to protect people? Is it associated with a herd protective effect? And those aren't necessarily things that we study in a phase 3 trial.
And there's still a lot unknown, isn't there? Because we don't know if these vaccines are simply going to protect people or if they're going to stop them transmitting as well.
Yes, and that's the entire question around herd immunity. Is there an effect of vaccinating enough people in the community that you will begin to protect people who are not vaccinated? That's one of the very important questions, but there are others. You know, we need to optimize the vaccine, which we didn't exactly have time to do. We'll need to look at something called a correlative protection, a specific laboratory test that tells us how the vaccine is working, but may make making the next set of vaccines much easier. And we need to understand, is the virus mutating? So a significant amount of work has to go into making sure that the emerging strains of virus remain sensitive to the vaccine. So there's still a lot of scientific work that needs to be done as well.
Yes, and a lot unknown about which age groups that these vaccines might protect more. But with this breaking news we've had from Pfizer, they are saying that it protects 95% of adults over 65 years. And there was a bit of a question mark about the protection for the older population. So that's very welcome news. Dr. Krishna Ella, your company is also in phase 3, I understand, of a vaccine trial. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how much you know that your vaccine can do to stop COVID?
I mean, we have to appreciate the Pfizer taking a risk of doing the mRNA vaccine, certainly a new technology, getting into the field. Those sort of risks, we can't take it in India. So we are much more in a very sensitive society. So we chosen a mostly 50 years old technology, inactivated vaccine, which is proven from babies to the up to the 85 years old, from a newborn baby to up to the old, whether it's injectable polio vaccine or rabies vaccine or injectable JE vaccine. There's so many other vaccines are inactivated. Well proven platform technology. But whether it will have a 95% efficacy, we do not know. But we just commenced a phase 3 trial. We will know it. But one thing about the inactivated vaccine, safety is proven. So you can be assured of the safety. Even efficacy is a little down, but at least safety will be well established for that platform technology.
How many people in your trial, and have there been any adverse effects so far? We know from the Pfizer one that mostly the effects have been very mild, the side effects, headaches, fatigue, in around just 2% of the volunteers. What about your trial?
We looked at all our vaccines, to be frank with you, all the safety profile of the Chinese, Europe, US, everybody. Even the Sinovac of Chinese is also well proven in the safety. We are absolutely the safest vaccine today so far in the world, if you look at it. The reason why I'm saying that, we don't have even a single any serious adverse reaction so far. More than 1,500, 2,000 people have been vaccinated. And now we will know it next 15 days. We'll have at least another 5,000 people will be coming out data. So I think it's an extremely safe vaccine.
Okay, thank you. And Jim, from the World Health Organization's perspective, things moving very fast.
Indeed they are, Louisa, and we're watching the news as everyone else. It is at breakneck speed in terms of the development, but it's encouraging because there is a real partnership around the world to, share information, share knowledge, share results, transparency, and a commitment to the ACT Accelerator, the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, for our diagnostics, for our therapeutics, and indeed for the vaccine, and an excellent collaboration with some of the biggest organizations in the world around COVAX, to make sure that we work on this together. It's very clear, our Director General, Dr. Tedros, my colleague, Dr. Kate O'Brien, who leads our immunization team, we're all in this together.
And just remind us about COVAX, please, Jim.
Indeed, it's a partnership as part of the Access to COVID Tool Accelerators that we've seen member states and countries all around the world support, the European Union engage with. And it's really at the heart of it is the principle of equity, to ensure that we're going to have an equitable allocation of vaccine when all these candidates have gone through their trials in production and available to the world, that we drive equitable allocation to high income, low income, all population groups.
And indeed, how is that going to work? Because we've heard that various nations have already bought millions of doses worth of various vaccines. Is there going to be a sort of a smash and grab by nations to try and get as many vaccines as they can for their populations? How are you going to make it equitable? Jim, do you have something to say about that? And then I saw Dr. Zhao raised his hand as well.
Well, there's been a number of commitments around the allocation framework of COVAX, and Victor is actively engaged in this and can comment further. And the principle of waves of distribution to ensure that those health and care workers and essential workers who are in the forefront of the response are given protection in their workplace, and then to reach out to other populations of vulnerable groups. I mean, the principles that underlie this ethical, equitable commitment we must applaud them. We must, and then act upon those as well. Victor.
Well, there's a phenomenon of vaccine nationalism, where each country is trying to buy up as much vaccine as possible to protect the citizen. As Jim said, the concern is, what about the poorer countries? What about other countries that doesn't have as much resource as US. US has warp speed, spent over $10 billion to get the vaccines and other therapeutics, etc. So what happened is, at the beginning of the outbreak, there's no organization internationally to bring together everybody. And I give kudos to WHO, European Commission, and others to create the accelerator, where I'm a principal and steering group. And really in the focus area called vaccine, called COVAX, that's when the groups such as WHO, CEPI, Gavi come together to say, how do we assure end-to-end, starting from research, risk manufacturing, procurement, and then distribution. And that's what they've done. They come together to say, how do we make sure there's equitable access to everyone? Now, one of the big issues is how to convince countries to come together, to share resources, and to share the idea of purchasing together. But COVAX has succeeded in getting 186 countries, 92 from the low-income countries to Gavi, and the rest from, in fact, high-income countries which are self-financing. Together, as Jim said, they work together to purchase the vaccines to enable to have sufficient for everyone, at least at the very beginning, some 10, 20% of the population to be vaccinated. So that's a really good start. Its aspiration is to have 2 billion doses by 2021, so that, as you can imagine, a lot of the world's population can be vaccinated. There's still work to be done, but I think it's unprecedented, as Jim said, and Jerome said, when all these stakeholders come together to work for the greater good.
Jim, 2 billion doses, are there enough health workers globally to achieve that?
Louisa, that's the big question that we're trying to answer, working with many of the partners in the COVAX facility in the ACT Accelerator. You know, we just mentioned here, and Victor's reaffirmed, you know, the commitment is one of equitable distribution of these 2 billion doses, and looking at the vulnerable, the elderly populations, 20% target. But the reality, two realities. The distribution of health workers today is not equitable. The very same countries where 3/4 of the population reside have got a fraction of the healthcare workers in comparison to the OECD countries, to high-income countries. We see a global shortage of healthcare workers in low and middle-income countries, which we've been calling about for decades in terms of the need to invest. So, unequitable allocation of health workers. Those same health workers are already struggling with managing the pandemic, with the challenges of infections and deaths of health workers. So we don't have as many as we started with. And then mental health challenge. So are there enough to deliver this aspirational 2 billion doses? Not without greater investment, not without additional recruitment. We see in the US, in the UK, already moves underway to recruit more healthcare workers to do their vaccine programs. We need to do the same when we come to this equitable allocation in low-income countries as well. We need to invest in the workforce to deliver the vaccine.
Thanks, Jim. And before I come to you, back to you, Dr. Zhao and Dr. Kim, a word, Dr. Ella, please, then on distribution in India. That's where you are, of course, and you have a vaccine which you will need to distribute. We know from, for example, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that has some difficulties. It has to be kept at incredibly low temperatures. So it's not as straightforward as it might seem. What are the problems with distribution as you see them in India, for example? Dr. Ella, if you could just pop your mic on for us, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry about that. We always think about the public health point of view as a manufacturer. Just we don't want to like a Pfizer making a 0.3 ml vaccine minus 80 and then figure out the market. We can't do that in India. So we have to reach 1.3 billion population. So the strategy, what we do is, how do you have a multi-dose vial? How do you, for example, I'll give you an example of whether we did like that or not. For example, rotavirus vaccine. Everybody will have 2 ml dose, single dose vaccine to the baby's mouth. We said we can't deliver 2 ml. Cold space is a problem. Distribution is logistic is a problem. And pouring 2 ml into the baby mouth is also difficult. We said, let's make a drop vaccine. We made a 5 drop, just put 5 drops like polio drops into the Rotavac. And we are the first one to make a multi-dose vial where 10 dose can be put in a small vial and the transportation reduced by 90% down in transportation and the cold chain. So we did that. So we have made an inactivated vaccine as a strategy in the beginning. Our strategy is how to reach 1.3 billion population. As Jim said, healthcare workers are not there in the rural situation. We call Anganwadi workers at the ground level. We are not there at all, not many, not educated people also, even if it is there. How do you make it? So we are now developing an alternative strategy of nasal drop vaccine. Can you have a 2 drops vaccine into the nasal? And fortunately, we're partnering with Washington University, St. Louis, and where they've shown extremely good sterilizing immunity in animals, and both in mice and monkeys. And now we're taking forward, now it's going to get into clinical trial, whether we can deliver 1.3 billion people reach with a drop vaccine. So that, it's a hypothesis. We are working, unless it proves in the clinical situation, we don't know how it works. But it's proven in animal. But so far, all the COVID vaccine, what is proven in the monkeys, is also proving true in the humans also. We assume the same thing will happen. And if it happens, that will change the revolutionary. We'll have 20 dose vaccine in a small vial, and it can reach the healthcare worker at the grassroots level.
It's really interesting that you are aiming the vaccine for the population in India rather than producing a vaccine and hoping one size fits all. Very interesting. Thank you. Dr. Zhao, I think you wanted to comment on what Jim Campbell was saying about distribution and the numbers of health workers needed.
Right. I think Dr. Eller made also a very important point because mRNA is still new. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that mRNA vaccine has reached past phase 3 and is ready to go to the public. So there's a lot of unknowns. As you said, it needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees. That itself is a big challenge when you imagine how to distribute this globally. It has to be given in 2 doses. But I want to come back to Jim's point that if you look at the world's population, we have 8 billion. We're only securing 2 billion doses by 2021. So it's still a long way to go. And I think there are 2 issues that emerge from this. One is who's going to get it first? And the WHO framework and the National Academy of Medicine's framework is healthcare workers and frontline workers first. That comes to about 5% of most population. And of course, Jim would like to see more people, and I agree with him, in the healthcare arena to deliver the vaccination. But so that first, and then those who are at highest risk, which are those with comorbid conditions, the elderly population, living in crowded conditions, etc. So you can imagine you need a very careful allocation framework to be sure that you're protecting the most vulnerable. And then eventually you'd like to have everybody to reach herd immunity. So the final issue, I think, is financing. You know, right now, Accelerator has raised a lot of money through the pledge and many other events, but it's still hand in hand, asking rich countries and donors to give you money. In the long run, that's not sustainable. Accelerator still have a gap of $28 billion to cover diagnostic, therapeutics, and vaccine. And we need a more sustainable financing by which people are committed to be sure that we have the money for all these things. One last point. You know, the world has spent $12 trillion in stimulus packages. What we need is a fraction of that money for diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccine to protect the population. So it's a great investment that everybody should participate.
Thank you very much. If there are no more comments on that whole subject, I'd like to move on. Are any of you able to shed any light on alternative research, convalescent plasma studies and research involving antibody therapies, for example, monoclonal antibodies? Are you able to shed any light on that? Is there any mileage in that?
No, I'm happy to quickly talk about the US situation. Last week, the FDA allowed an emergency use authorization on the Lilly monoclonal antibody. So they have 80,000 doses to be distributed nationally for use in early symptomatic cases, preferably to be outpatient. As you can imagine, if you look at the number of cases a day in US, this is hardly sufficient. So we're going to face with the same issue of who's going to get it first, how to use it effectively. And I think this may be even a bigger issue than the vaccination issue.
But we are not limited to just relying on the vaccines. There are studies and there's research going on into this alternative research. So that's really important. And then a question, please, about anti-vaxxers and lines coming out from anti-vaxxers, discussion from those either concerned about the possibility of compulsory vaccination, on some groups actively campaigning against vaccines altogether. One thing that we're hearing is they're saying these vaccines alter your DNA, and that comes down to this new technology, mRNA, doesn't it? Is there any truth in that? There is a link between DNA and mRNA. Could one of you just explain that for us? Who would like to take that on? Dr. Kim.
So, I think that there's a misunderstanding of the biology. In our bodies, we have genetic information that is DNA. We really need to make that into protein. And that's what, when you look at the different types of vaccines, you have DNA vaccines, you have RNA vaccines, and you have protein vaccines. RNA is the vehicle by which genetic information is transferred from the core of information, the DNA, into protein. And so what the developers have done is they've taken the messenger, in this case, actually messenger RNA, and they've turned that into the vaccine that will directly make the protein. So there's no direct involvement of the genetic information at all. So again, that, like everything that's gone on, the opposition to vaccination, like the opposition to masks, needs to be something that we prepare for. We have to engage communities. We have to assure the population that this vaccine, despite the speed of its development, still is committed to both efficacy and safety. And those are really important. Paul Offit made the point that, the average American parent, and it's true, the vast majority, 80% or so of American parents, have their kids stuck up to 26 or 27 times for 14 diseases that they have never seen in their lives because of the effectiveness of vaccines. We have to start with that confidence in the safety and efficacy of vaccines and build on it to overcome the things that are going to be arrayed against it, and that we know are going to be arrayed against it.
Yeah, and people's perceptions are so important, isn't it? If they have a certain perception of something, and when it comes to this mRNA technology that these newish vaccines are using, it has been tested before, I understand, but it has never been approved. So one could understand concerns.
And that's why the collection of safety information in a clinical trial is so important. And if someone were to just watch a clinical trial being done, as Dr. Zhao and myself and Dr. Earle have all experienced this, I mean, the collection of information from volunteers, you actually solicit, you say, have you had the following? And you record it, and you have to record it, and then someone comes back and checks that you've recorded it correctly. I mean, the whole purpose of clinical trials is to very, very carefully document side effects. And then countries like the United States and other countries around the world have systems to report side effects that occur, as Dr. Zhao said, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years after vaccination, because these rare events are things that, can have catastrophic consequences for uptake and acceptance of vaccines. So we have to be very careful. The WHO has a special program to strengthen safety reporting in low and middle income countries. really important to build confidence in vaccines.
Yeah, okay, thanks so much for that. We've got a few minutes left. Please, if any of you are watching and want to submit a question, please do. I can put it to the panel. One has come in. There's lots of discussion regarding those opposed to, I think we may have answered this. Those opposed to vaccinations and even the possibility of compulsory vaccination. How do we bring the public with us on this journey? How important is public confidence? We have just answered that. But to that point, actually, I wanted to say, we've talked about the order of eligibility in which people should be vaccinated, but should we also be thinking a little bit more creatively? For example, should celebrities and high-profile people be seen to be vaccinated first? Would that encourage and make the general population more confident? Anyone thoughts on that?
Well, I'd like to come back on the issue of transparency and public education. We didn't quite get into that. I think what we've been saying is that the results have to be validated, they have to be reviewed properly, the agency have to be independent of political and other undue influence, and it has to be transparent so that the public sees that we are looking out for the best interest. You know, during the polio vaccine times in 1970s, we had a national campaign of vaccination, and that worked really well. And it happened again in 1980s, a national campaign. I think there needs to be a campaign by everybody, WHO, US government, etc., to talk about the transparency, the process of vaccine development to approval, to distribution, and the safety aspects, and to make people understand that it's important to be vaccinated. I think that has to be a concerted effort in that regard.
Yeah, something for everybody to think about. And Dr. Eller, you wanted to make a point earlier.
This anti-vaccine lobby is nothing wrong in it, having it. Okay, that brings democracy under control. And what I would say is today's situation of this vaccine is different from all other children's vaccine, because this is today economy is affected and everybody lost the job and people are hungry. Is the differences. They're not like earlier vaccines, which is child vaccination and other thing. That's number one. Number 2 point, any mRNA, usually only RNA virus can convert into DNA, but human mRNA will never convert back to DNA. So the people has to understand RNA of the human system will not convert back to DNA. Only RNA virus can do that, but not this way. So people should understand the science is different from this, what they're using. So nothing to be worried about it.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. As we come to an end, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I wanted to look forward to next year. It's going to be a big year, obviously. Hopefully these initial 2 billion doses will be made available, but also Jim Campbell from the World Health Organization, member states of the WHO recently designated 2021 as the International Year of Health and Care Workers. Such important recognition of all the work they've done this year throughout the world.
Indeed, Louisa, just in the World Health Assembly, our first ever virtual World Health Assembly, testimony to the tireless efforts of health and care workers around the world, recognizing, of course, that whilst those in hospitals and healthcare facilities are critical, those that are looking after the aged population, working in informal settings as care workers, also are critical to the response. And we're hoping that the year will not just be a cause for recognition and celebration, but a platform for action. We need to invest in education, in employment, in their pay, in their terms and conditions, in their health and safety, their decent work. We, just as Victor was calling out the investment that's needed for the ACT Accelerator, we need the investment as well for the workers that will drive its delivery in every single country around the world. A cause for action.
Jim, thank you so much. Gentlemen, before we get cut off, I know we could stay here all day talking about this. Literally one word, please. Well, a date. When, from each of you, when do you think life will get back to normal? Just a date, please. Jim? Jerome Kim?
All right, I'll go first. I think it will be not until 2022 in most of the world.
Thank you. Dr. Zhao?
I agree.
2022. Dr. Ella in India?
Oh, we need to find an astrologer to find out the reason. But,
yeah, it's a bit of a
but
trick.
certainly one thing I can say is we'll have enough quantity of vaccine will be available. So definitely the disease will come by 2022.
Thank you. Jim, when do you think we'll experience normality again?
Well, the new normal is with us today. We have to do the basics. We have to do the basics well, get the vaccine going, and live with the changes over the next 18 to 24 months. We're making progress. The infection is coming under control in many, many countries.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. So much hope rests on these vaccines, so much at stake. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, your knowledge, and your expertise. Jim Campbell from the World Health Organization, Dr. Victor Zhao from the National Academy of Medicine in the USA, Dr. Jerome Kim, the International Vaccine Institute in South Korea, and Dr. Krishna Ella from Bharat Biotech in India. Thank you so much. I'll be back tomorrow with another In Focus panel session. Join me then.
Thank you.